So John, you work with some of the biggest, most beloved entertainment franchises in the world. I'm interested in hearing about how you got into this part of the games business. Obviously, licensed games have a long and storied history. You're working with some really successful mobile and social games like The Walking Dead, Star Trek, and Game of Thrones. Tell me about why and how you set up this company, and tell me about how you persuaded George R.R. Martin to let you have Game of Thrones.
Sure. I started the company because I saw what was going to happen with these emerging platforms of social and mobile, and I saw it as an opportunity to bring in not just a couple 100 million fans like we have on PC and console, but billions of people around the world, and through a device that connects them together all the time. So to me, it was less about the licensed game company idea and more about the idea that you could build truly massive worlds. And what I realized in going about this is that if I was going to do that and try to go after a huge mass market of people that hadn't really even played games before, for the most part, important thing to remember, like there's a couple billion people in this addressable market of mobile, and most of them have never played a PC or a console game. So they have no context, and I needed to provide them with context. And that was worlds that they were already familiar with, that they really loved. So the first one, is, as you noted, was Game of Thrones. So we started there. The story behind it is I just started the company. I had this idea. A friend connected me to an agent who was in Hollywood who I was told represented various science fiction and fantasy authors. I actually had no idea who this guy even represented. I got on the phone with him, and I shared the idea, and he was like, agents don't really give you any feedback. And I said, the ultimate would be like if we did something like Game of Thrones. And he's like, okay. Turns out, after I got off the phone with him, my friend mentioned me, well, he's the agent for George R.R. Martin, right? No, I had no idea, actually. I was just completely ignorant on this call. So anyway, I continued to badger this agent for about a year, and I think it just got to the point where he was like, we're going to have to give this guy a 20-minute audience with George, or we're just never going to get rid of him, and I can never optimize my time again. He put me in front of George, and the 20 minutes became a full day in which we talked about how we could take his world and really bring it to life at large scale. At the time, they were calling these social games. Remember back in the days of Facebook games, quote unquote social? They weren't very social other than you had a Facebook feed which would spam you all day long with messages about how you should get your friends playing. But I told him we'd do an anti-social game because that's what Game of Thrones is about. So it'd be about backstabbing and politics and backroom secret deals and stuff like that. And George loved it. He only added one thing at the end of the day. He said, well, if we do this, you have to kill a lot of people in this game. So I said, no problem, George, we can do that. So that took a year just to get to that first meeting, and then it was another year to convince HBO that it was as good of an idea as we thought. So the first couple of years of this business was actually just talking to George and HBO for the most part. And then we got this incredible opportunity to build a game called Game of Thrones Ascent, which is a game built by 8 people that launched on Facebook 6 years ago and has been running ever since. And that's how our company got its start.
I look at the kids today, my kids, and if they're into something like Stranger Things, they're really into it and they want everything to do with it. Do you think we're in a cultural moment where games like this can get some purchase?
Yeah, I think Stranger Things and Ready Player One, these kind of tell us something about what has emerged with gamer culture, if we want to call it that, and just mass media culture in general. I mean, on the one hand, there's the nostalgic aspect of it, right? Like I watch Stranger Things and I see the kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it just so happens that that's probably exactly what I was doing when I was just about that age. We didn't have, demons invading my town other than in our imaginations, but I was doing that, and Ready Player One is bringing back the nostalgia of it. But, I think there's something bigger than just the nostalgic aspect, which is if I look at Ready Player One, what is the real story about? It's people that really loved something, be it Joust or Dungeons and Dragons or all these things, and just trying to figure out how do you make it way more accessible for a huge world of people. And if you look at what happens in the plot of that story, Oasis has successfully brought it essentially to the whole world. That's why it's so big. So I think there's sort of two things at work. One is the nostalgia, but we really love this stuff. And this is a great time to be alive and be a geek and love these things, because now we have all these ways not to just enjoy it for ourselves, but to share it with our friends around us.
Tell me about designing these games, because obviously when somebody comes to play them, there's a certain expectation of who and what they'll be once they start playing.
Well, for us, we actually think in terms of the world first, and the world is what tells you what kind of characters you're going to have. So there's a lot of intellectual property out there, a lot of different stories that can be adapted into games. The kind that we really get excited about are worlds first and foremost. So they have a lot of history and lore behind them, and the player can come in and be anyone within that world. And so then you're grappling with the problems of that world. So that's a little bit different than playing a game where, say, you're Batman, for example. So if you do a Batman game, there's only certain things that you're going to do. And it's going to be awesome, by the way, not knocking Batman games, but to really create a world situation, you have to create something where millions of people can actually be their own distinct roles. So what's important building this kind of game is just bringing the themes and the aspects of that world that are authentic to life. So in Game of Thrones, for example, it's about the politics and the diplomacy and the secrets and all that, and how it comes back to you as a player, and then creating this environment where the players interact with each other and enjoy those sort of interactions. If they've read it in the book, they're going to be able to do it in the game. In Star Trek, it's about the spirit of optimism and discovery and exploration and things like that, and kind of an element of fantasy football with phasers in our particular game, because you're putting this team of people together from all the famous characters of Star Trek. But it's that, again, the nostalgia is part of it, but also being able to live in the world and occupy it and really feel like you're part of it.
Tell me about the shape of the deals that you're doing with these big entertainment companies. How does the monetization work?
All our games are free-to-play games. The way they work is we sell you content primarily, so you're buying characters. That's the biggest way that we monetize our products. So in our Star Trek game, for example, which is our biggest one so far, about 500 characters that you can buy. So there's just a lot that you can kind of collect and keep working with different teams and so forth. I'm a big believer in free-to-play, particularly in the current generation of games, because it's the most effective way to monetize attention. So if people are playing the game and they're spending a lot of time on it, you can provide them with content and experiences that sort of monetize in direct proportion to the time that they're spending. And that allows us as a game creator to keep adding to the world and adding characters and adding content and making it a new experience every day for people.
Tell me about the community as well. I mean, presumably you want to build a community around these games, but also you've got this larger community out there, and you have to bring them together in some way. How do you go about that?
Well, it's complicated. So you take something like Star Trek, for example. It's been around for 50 years, and we have to appeal to everyone from people that watch the original series to now Star Trek Discovery is on the air. Anyone watch Star Trek Discovery, by the way? Just interesting poll. Yeah, so it's a great new show, but there's a huge number of Star Trek fans out there, and they all think their Star Trek is the best Star Trek. And some of them believe that newer Star Trek is somehow not canonical or outside or not as good for whatever reason. So, that's actually the magic of what we realized with Star Trek, is that if we picked one and bet on one, it would be a small experience for a small group of people. But actually what's awesome about Star Trek in particular is that everyone has their favorite character. I mean, there's the big five, the captains and Worf and Data, that's pretty much, a few of the favorites, but there's this huge long tail of favorite characters as well. So people have their own distinct preferences, and we wanted to make it a place where no matter what kind of Star Trek fan you are, you would be able to really enjoy that and express yourself, express your fandom, and also kind of think like a captain or think like a character from Star Trek. And we find that that's important for everything that we've worked with. I mean, Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, certainly no exception. In Game of Thrones, there's episodes people love, most of them, but then there's episodes people don't, and there's things where it's different from the books. You got to deal with book fans versus the people who've watched the HBO series. Walking Dead, you have the same distinctions there. So yeah, it's a challenging piece, But I think we just bring it to life through authenticity. So everything we do is very earnest. It's not just to kind of create a piece of content that we put a dollar sign on and move on to the next thing and just try to maximize the number of merchandise sales we can do. I think what people see from us is we care about the story, we care about their fan experience, we care about the community and how they interact with each other, and that is brought across in the products.
When you go and see the agents or the franchise holders, what kind of objections do they most often come up with?
Well, I try never to talk to agents ever again in my life, to be honest. The media companies are getting a lot more savvy about it, and I would say it fits. One of the things I said earlier was there's sort of the 1.0 version of licensed games where this might as well be a coffee mug or a t-shirt, and it's just a licensing department somewhere just trying to create a few points on some product sales that carries their name. And we're not really talking to those kind of companies for the most part. I think there's a next generation or a next level of licensed games, and they're thinking about it quite differently. Yes, of course, revenue that can be generated from it is very important, but more importantly, it fills a strategic role in their companies now where the game is part of a foundation that allows people to come in and experience that IP every day, really re-enter that world every day. So when we first went to HBO, for example, the thing that they were most concerned with was that Game of Thrones wasn't going to be on the air, or it wasn't going to be new for about 42 weeks of the year. So how do you bring someone back into an experience that's living and dynamic? We did it through every time there is an episode on the air, right that day you're going to see content, items, characters, plot lines that were reflected within the show that you just watched, and then we continue it every single week when the show isn't new. So it gives people a different way of experiencing the content of Game of Thrones and keeping them actively engaged. Like our customers are there several times a day playing, interacting with Game of Thrones content. Star Trek, Walking Dead, we're following a similar model. But what we're hearing from all media companies now is just concern about the overall dearth of innovation, and there's a lot of games that are just cookie cutter clones of something that already exists. Not enough attention to storytelling is a big one that we hear. So all the media companies that we work with, they think of themselves as storytellers first and foremost, and certainly the people who are the creators, the George R. Martins, the Robert Kirkmans, Kurtzman at Star Trek. These are people who are storytellers. They want their stories to be told accurately and expansively to big audiences. So the media companies really want games to be worlds that capture the storytelling and do it in a high quality way that engages their fans and makes it sustainable. So, it's all that. It's sustainability comes through the financial execution of the game and just making sure that it can pay the bills and keep going. But ultimately, to connect with fans and keep the fan really excited, you got to be able to tell the stories that are authentic and keep it fresh and ongoing and alive.
Yeah, because most game developers can kind of make it up as they go along, whereas you have to live within the rules and the canon of the franchises. How onerous and difficult do you find that?
Well, for us, it's just, I think that is hard for a lot of companies. So if you're a game designer who comes at it from the auteur view of the games business where you know best and you're going to tell everyone to create, I think those people actually do have difficulty creating the kind of games we do. For us, we approach it from a different direction, which is it's about the world first and foremost, and we want to capture the essence of that world accurately in anything that we do. So for us, we love the conversations with the creators. We want to understand what they're thinking and what their motivations are behind it, where they're going long term. And in fact, one of the ways we really differentiate ourselves as a creator of these kind of games, we were one of the first, but the way we continue to do it is the fact that we've become very good at working with the creators as well. So I think you'll find that there are licensing departments in a lot of media companies, and they'll do deals, and they maybe will or won't have support of the creative organizations at the same time, or they hope that the creative organizations don't even see this thing that they're licensing out half the time. We actually have made it a requirement that we don't really do any deals unless the creator is going to be involved and they're going to see what we're doing and they have input into the process. So when you do that, what you do is you're building a company where it's really embedded into our DNA, where we love that, we love to just kind of bring their worlds to life, and we've made a craft out of it. And if you do it that way, it's not onerous. It's of course about building trust. You have to show them that you really do that as time goes on, and you show them that you really do care about what you're doing and you're applying craft to it. Then there tends to be fewer check steps along the way. Never goes away completely, but the trust is there so that they know that you're going to create something that their fans will really enjoy.
One of the reasons why licenses in games kind of fell apart was because of the time differential between making a movie, which is a couple of years, and making a video game, which is 3 to 5 years. And so you had some poor quality games which dragged the whole business down. Nowadays I see licensed games which seem to be much smaller in scale. They're either kind of narrative adventures or they're social mobile games. Do you see a time where premium games can get back into this business?
Well, I think if by premium games you mean games which you pay for once and then move on, I think it's always going to be difficult to sync up that model because you're building something that really is only monetized at one particular event in time, and then the fan base moves on. And you've got an increasingly competitive media environment, so there's 500 plus scripted series on TV right now, which is twice as many as there was just a few years ago. You've got a lot more channels, so the audience is very distracted. There's a lot of things out there. The media companies really want to figure out ways to sustain engagement rather than just kind of create events. So what we tend to focus on isn't so much the one-time movie spectacle when we're working with films, which we are for some of our future pipeline. It's films organized into longer run series or franchises, trilogies and whatnot, because we're seeing that the media company is making an investment over time. Television, of course, long running television like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Walking Dead, which is where we've built our business so far, is by definition something that sustains over time. So I think that overall media companies are much more concerned today about creating sustained engagement over time, and free to play, and in some cases some subscription-based businesses or even advertising-based businesses, all of those actually are much better at monetizing sustained engagement as opposed to the one-time event. So I think there are evergreen franchises which are still going to have great IP-based games. I think Telltale, for example, has done a great job of bringing kind of single-player event-in-time-based game experiences and working with evergreen franchises. But yeah, syncing up the premium model with like the one-time movie is always going to be challenging.
And you said that this was something that you were looking at, and that seems to me to be quite a different skill, not simply engaging with a brand that everybody knows already, but predicting the success of something that hasn't been released yet. Well,
in every case, we have done a deal, including ones that we haven't yet announced. There's been some kind of foundational audience. Usually it's been a book or a comic book or something like that that has sat underneath the new television series or the new movie. We really think that it's hard to have these things spring into life entirely as a media event. Having the foundation there first of books and things that there's a real core fan base for, that's been important for us. So we've been lucky on the things we've guessed on. Game of Thrones, we did the deal before HBO did the first series, but I loved the book so much and I thought it would be the right kind of world to create something highly social. Star Trek, we bet on the fact that this 50-year-old franchise would be able to bring it back with the new series and the new movies. You know, Walking Dead just keeps on going and has more spin-off series. So, you know, there's a lot that we look for, but we really look at the fan base more than anything else. Size of the fan base is important, but also the qualities of them, like how engaged are they, what do they talk about? Because how they act in their microcosms online on social media is also how they're going to act in a game as they recruit their other friends to play it and talk about with their friends.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed that. Thank you.